So a few months back, this guy decided it would be a good idea to drive down the freeway near Eugene, Oregon, and throw some $200,000 out his window. It was a national news story, causing traffic issues and obviously leading to several people combing over the area surrounding the freeway where the guy did this. He said he just wanted to gift his money to other people, but in the process drained his family's shared bank account. Perhaps not the best method to share your wealth with the rest of the world, but there are others out there that have engaged in similar action, granted with a much smaller amount of money. Strangely enough, that leads us to Portland's Skid Row in the early 1960s. Most of us have thrown a few bucks at someone dealing with hard times or living on the streets, but to give up a substantial amount of cash, unprovoked, it's not a common thing. And yet, in Portland's Skid Row area, it happened twice in less than 2 years. Unlikely acts of human kindness where they were needed the most. During this time, Skid Row, today a mix of Portland's Chinatown and Skidmore historic districts, was mostly made up of destitute middle-aged men living in rundown hotels and flophouses. Their primary vice? Alcohol. Let's take a step back to December 6th, 1960. The cold season was upon everyone in the area, one of whom was an unemployed 42-year-old appliance repairman named Morris Quintard. Despite his circumstances, Quintard made a decision. He visited his bank and withdrew all of his savings, approximately $2,500, more than $25,000 in today's money. After that, he threw away his bank book. He then walked into the middle of Skid Row, the corner of West 3rd and Burnside, and began handing out $5 and $10 bills that made up his savings to passers-by on the street. Obviously, a small crowd began gathering around Quintard in an orderly manner, though. Despite their desperation, nobody attacked Quintard to try to take all of his money on their own. The crowd would rise to nearly 100 people, capturing the attention of a patrolman named Orny Ness, who quickly rushed the scene and removed Quintard from there, taking him to nearby police headquarters. Clearly, Quintard had committed no crime, but Ness was probably somewhat baffled by his behavior. When asked why he gave all his money away, while being unemployed and practically homeless, Quintard said, "I just happen to love people. I figured it'd do more good for them to have it than for me to keep it in the bank. I did a lot of good." This all leaves me wondering why Quintard's circumstances were so dire, considering how much money he had saved up. Granted, only 3 years earlier, 1957, two brothers living in the Skid Row area for a decade passed away, and upon their death, it was learned that they had an estate worth $100,000. But for whatever reason, they chose to live in squalor. I guess I can understand that. Quintard would be quickly released, with Ness helping him find a place to stay for the night. He was last seen around this time at the Union Gospel Mission, just off Burnside. And then, he just seemed to disappear. With no money, no family, and no other resources, it's a wonder how Quintard could have even moved that far from Skid Row. But a couple weeks later, it was reported the police had been inundated with calls and letters from businesses looking to offer Quintard a job, figuring he needed one, but also probably because he'd made a splash in local headlines recently. he was the flavor of the month as far as everyone was concerned. And as far as I know, he was never found. But he probably was. This story was a bright light flashing in the often dark and blighted environment of this particular area at that time, and it was unlikely to ever happen again. At least for a couple years, I guess. November 9th, 1962. Hal Hughes, a businessman from Oak Harbor, Washington, was in town for a medical checkup. Despite having money and a job, unlike Morris Quintard, Hughes decided to stay at a Skid Row hotel. Maybe he was just frugal. While the location of the hotel he stayed at was never mentioned, when he began throwing coins out of his window, it was noted that the spectacle attracted people from along Burnside Street, a block away. This means Hughes was either staying on Ankeny Street to the south or Cooch Street to the north. My money would be on Cooch Street, which had more hotels. In Hughes's case, I get the feeling he's sitting in his room, not much to do. He's just in town for one thing and otherwise is just hanging around. He walked up to his room's window and saw a man sitting on the sidewalk across the street, probably homeless. He called out to the man and threw a handful of quarters down to him, which the man quickly gathered up. And things just expanded quickly from there, leading to, like in the Quintard story, about 100 people gathering beneath Hughes's window. Quickly running out of coins, he called a bellboy up to go out and get more rolls, specifically of nickels and quarters, and some cigarettes as well. Once again, police became involved when the chaotic gathering of people on the sidewalk began to spill into the street, obstructing traffic. They demanded the hotel manager put a stop to this, and they did so by canceling Hughes's bellboy service. All in all, he gave away about $50 in coins, as well as several packs of cigarettes. As with Morris Quintard, Hal Hughes was asked, in the end, why did he do it? He replied simply by asking, "Who looks out for the bum?" I figured that 3 solid hours of pennies from heaven would brighten their day. And he wasn't wrong. An out-of-work truck driver named Jim Ming was quoted in newspapers to say, "I was broke, but now I got $50 and a pack of smokes." Not much, but something he and many others in the area didn't have that day, until Hal Hughes decided to open up his window. He then had his medical procedure done and went back home to Washington, but did suggest he might try this again one day. I found no information to suggest he did. But 2 rare stories, not only over a short period of time, but also within a couple of blocks of each other, and in a Skid Row area of all places, where people need the most. It's definitely an interesting little piece of 1960s history, and, at least to me, feels a lot like a relic of lost time.